All right. So, what'll happen, don't flip it over yet, but when you flip it over, you're going to see the very first column at the very top. It's going to say practice trial. When I say go, you're going to look at the words and you're going to decide, does the word describe a flower or an insect? And if you think it's a flower, put a check or an X on the flower column. If you think it's an insect, put a check or an X on the insect column. It can't be both. You've got to choose which column it goes into. And so you do that for all of the words. I'm going to have a stopwatch going. And when you finish, you need to look up and see what time it is, how many seconds have gone by, and write down your time. Once everybody finishes, and how I'll know everybody finishes is everyone's pencils down, you'll all be looking at me. Okay? So only do practice trial. Don't look. There's going to be a trial A and a trial B. Don't look at those yet. Okay? If it helps you, you can fold it like I have. Kind of up to you. All I did was start with B, and I folded it halfway back and then wrapped it. So we're starting with practice trial. Don't start until I say go. Are there any questions? Everyone have the practice trial in front of them? Ready? Go. And again, when you've finished and you've written your time down, pencils down, look at me so I know everybody's done. Anybody still going? Okay. Not too hard, was it? Everybody know what to do? So that kind of gave us some time to practice, to kind of know what the instructions are. So for this next one, everybody flip over to trial A. You have more words this time in that column, but now you've got to decide, does this represent either a male leader or a female supporter? And you have to go with your first instinct. So literally, this needs to be what is the first thing in your brain that you decide. When you have done that with all of them, and again, they can only go in one column. You can't check both. When you're done, report your time. Ready? Go. Anybody still working? Okay. Now, this last one, trial B. Another set of words. This time, you're going to decide, does it go in the column that says male supporter or in the column that says female leader? Report your time when you finish. Ready? Go. Make sure you write your time down. Anyone still working? Okay. So now what you want to do, you see below that, you see it says difference between B and A. I want you to take the seconds, the amount of time that you had for trial B, and subtract A from it. So that's okay. If you have a negative number, that's okay. but it should be B minus A, not A minus B. And put what that number is there. Everybody got it? Okay. Anybody have negative numbers? What were your negative numbers?
2.
Negative 2.
Negative 5.
Negative 1.
Negative 2.
Negative 3.
Negative what?
3.
3. Okay. Anybody else have negative numbers? And y'all did B minus A. Okay. What were the other numbers that y'all had that were positive?
5.
11.
2. 3.
1. 12.
3.
Anybody else? 7. I'm going to put mine up here. What do y'all think that this assessment just did?
Something to do with gender.
Had something to do with gender. So, okay, kind of walk me through, when you did trial A, what was that experience like? You were determining whether these terms represented a male or a leader or a female / supporter. Easy, hard, complicated. What would y'all say?
I think trial A was easier, just because when I think of women, I think of more like compassionate, and like, just because the women I've been around have been like that.
Mhm.
So whenever you put that with a supporter, it kind of goes with that. And then I kind of struggled with trial B because I still thought about women as compassionate and all those things, but I also have supporter, and that means that too. So
Yeah, so compassionate. That was one word. I'm going to write that down, that there seemed to be a little bit of dissonance with. Okay, was there another word that kind of between the two trials you maybe had a hard time or noticed a difference? Huh? Sympathetic? Tell me about sympathetic. What was difficult about that between the two trials?
I mean, as a leader, you don't really depends on how your style is if you're going to be sympathetic or not. So as a female leader, most think, oh, they're so motherly, they're going to be sympathetic, blah blah blah. But at the same time, the supporter has to be sympathetic because they have to understand what you're going through and support you through it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of that.
Any other words? Understanding? Why was that one hard?
Well, I mean, you would think that a leader would need to be understanding of their supporters, of their followers, so to speak, but also I think sometimes a supporter or a follower, we tend to forget that leaders are human and that they're also not going to be perfect, and so you have to be understanding that they have their own struggles too.
Mm-hmm. So looking at those words, we'll just kind of stick with those three. When you checked compassionate on trial A, did most of y'all put it as female supporter? Mm-hmm. Anybody put it as anything different? So then on trial B, what did y'all check for it?
I kept it on female.
Kept it on female. Okay. Sympathetic, what did y'all put it as? Female supporter, and what did y'all keep it as on trial B?
Female.
Understanding.
I put it
So we had two. So y'all put sympathetic more as a supporter position rather than it being gender. But then everybody else, it stayed with the same gender. So do you see how there were you either had to make the choice for the word either based on the gender or based on the role, right? So some people kept the words based off of gender, some people kept the words based off of role. Understanding, what did y'all have it as for trial A?
Female.
Email, and what about B?
Female.
No.
Okay, so no. So, what do you think this assessment, this test, demonstrates or may reveal?
The roles that women and male play naturally signal our opinions that we don't realize.
Implicit bias. What are implicit bias? Things you don't even notice that we tend to have bias towards. I think, and the reason I wanted to start this class off with it is that kind of our topics today and our topics on Thursday can sometimes, I think, the students come off like preachy. But what I want this assessment and what this assessment should show us is that we all have biases, right? I mean, I told y'all I put my score up here too. So it's not like I had a 0. It's not even like I had a negative number. And I'll tell y'all what those numbers mean in a second. But we all have these biases that whether we've taken the time to think about them or not, they exist there. And so I think if we can start on that like level playing field when we start, it helps these topics not seem preachy, and it helps us to see that they really are relevant things for us to discuss. What this does too is it does help us see that we have implicit bias directly related to gender and leadership. How does this help us understand that? Just kind of think about even the 3 words that y'all pointed out that y'all struggled with. So we think about the word compassionate. Y'all said that in trial A, compassionate, y'all had as female supporter, but in trial B, a majority of people put it as female leader. So is compassionate a trait of a leader or a supporter? Or is it just a trait of a female?
It can be the trait of both a leader and a supporter.
Okay. So I think us kind of talking about followership and seeing followers as leaders, we would say everybody needs to have compassion at some level. But are there certain traits that we tend to stereotype towards a certain gender? Which I'll say that. This test, I like it because I think it's easy. Like it was quick and easy to do, right? Do you think it's pretty straight to the point? It's developed by Harvard. So really smart people, they can do really easy things too. So it must be legit, right, if Harvard did it. But what they're trying to show is that we do have implicit biases when it comes to leadership. And so we may, and I say we, including myself, we may say we go into leadership positions seeing everyone as equal, not having biases, but there are these things in the back of our mind, these experiences that we've had that have caused us to make decisions. Can y'all maybe think of a time personally where maybe you've made a judgment about someone's leadership that you called it something, but maybe now you look back and you're like, that was a gender stereotype? Maybe a teacher. Cool. Huh?
Well, I had this one English teacher. She was very like outspoken, and I was just like, oh, she's just so emotional. When actually she was just like really passionate about us actually learning what we were supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But I just called her emotional.
Just called her emotional, yeah. So can I use that example to kind of give y'all a hypothetical? Do you think, would any of y'all say you've been around a teacher or a leader that you've said they're too emotional? A female. Have you ever had a male leader that now that you look back at it acted the same way? Did you call them emotional, or what did you call them? Passionate, right? Again, I'm putting myself here with you. I've done it a lot of times. So that's kind of what today's conversation is all about. It's not about women need to take over the world. I want to say that. Like, I think in the past, and I'm talking to the guys in the room here. I am kind of talking to y'all specifically. I think in the past, people have felt like this chapter is saying, like, men are awful and women need to just rule the world. Like, that's not at all what this conversation's about. What the chapter is about is saying we've got to really start looking at leadership as a whole, that if we're not going to address these implicit biases that we have about gender, then we're going to continue limiting opportunities to people. And there's a really cool quote. It says that if we don't develop women leaders, we're marginalizing half of our brain power. What do you think that quote means? We're losing 50% of the population. Yeah, I think at this point in this class we've talked about how, especially in the team chapter, diversity and what that brings and all of the benefits that it brings to teams. And so if we're not giving people the opportunity to serve in leadership roles because of our implicit bias, we're losing half of the brain power that we could potentially have. And so it's helping y'all as leaders and understanding this theory, kind of when you go to call someone emotional or you go to call someone passionate, just to kind of say, well, is that because they're truly being emotional, or is it because I perceive women to be more emotional, or I perceive men just to be very passionate about what they're doing? It's just making you kind of have that check at first. So that's where we're starting out. If you're wondering what in the world the scores meant on this assessment, essentially if you had a negative score, that means that you tended not to have as many implicit biases when it came to gender and leadership. If you have a positive score, that means that you do. And there's not really a scale to say, okay, if you're between 1 and 5, you have low biases. If you're above 10, you have high. No, there's nothing like that, because there's not a real tangible way to measure biases. But what it shows is that it took you more time to decide in column B or trial B which column the words went into. And the reason for that is that we have preconceived notions. We consider compassionate to typically be a female trait, and we see it to typically be a supporter trait. Well, then when you have in column B kind of the opposite, like we put a gender with the opposite role, it created what's called dissonance. And so you were having to kind of think, even if it was for an extra millisecond, hold on, this doesn't match up with what I've always thought this word should go with. Now I've got to really think about it, and you had to make a choice. So just that kind of second hesitation is just indicative that, hey, there may have been a little bias there that you didn't realize before. Is it bad? Should you walk away today feeling bad for having biases? No. And the reason I say that is that we all have them. Should you feel bad if you walk away today having biases and choose not to do anything about them? Okay. And I shouldn't say feel bad. I don't want anybody to walk away feeling guilty. But I'm just saying that's kind of the fun part of education here. So all that to say, it's kind of where we're going to use the foundations to start our conversation today. I loved reading y'all's discussion thread from last week. Can I just tell y'all, I was just giddy. And the reason I was giddy is that some of y'all don't ever talk in here, and the things that y'all put in y'all's discussion post are phenomenal. Does someone mind sharing something that you read that someone else wrote that just really stuck with you, or that impressed you, or made you think? Somebody want to share? And you may not remember exactly who it went with. If you do know who it went with, let's give them kudos. But if you don't, that's fine. But kind of think back. What is something that you remember reading from one of your peers' posts that you thought was really good? Or was a good point?
Until now,
Yeah, we'll take some time to think about it. You might even think about what you wrote, if that's a good place to start. What's something just in general that stuck out to you from watching the video that related to chapter 15?
I think a lot of people pointed out that like it said like the ag world is like a man's world, but and like how they kind of like everybody touched on like there's not necessarily an issue with it being considered a man's world. It was just like people needing to be more open-minded about like a woman being in charge. Like there wasn't an issue with guys being in charge, but yet it's like a woman doesn't feel like she could be like taken seriously as like a leader. I read that in like multiple people's kind of like that's how I took it based on.
Yeah, because like, is it Cunningham? No, the blonde. She mentioned that when she went to someone's farm, they asked for her husband, or like they were talking about that kind of stuff, and that really stood out. Like, no one should ever do that. Like, so especially nowadays, like, that's so like bad to do. Like, you shouldn't do it. But they said that's just normal, which is so true. Like, I've gone, like, my dad's made me do deals just so I learn, and they're like, where's your dad? No, this is between me and you. Like, and I mean, I'm young, so they look more down on me, but my dad made me do that just because, well, my dad has 3 girls, so he never had the son to do that, so he's like, oh, well, you guys have to learn because you're going to have to stand your own because this is all going to be yours someday.
Right.
So,
right.
And people don't think about it that way because it's so not typical for one, the son taking over the farm, too, not just a husband or wife, kids.
And I think the thing to say with like comments like that is, do you think the people mean it derogatory or mean it to be offensive? Or no, I don't think people's intentions are bad. Yeah. I think it goes back to just that kind of implicit bias, like just not even realizing that that's there. That's good. Yeah.
So my family owns like a grain elevator, food store, like whatever. So I'm around everyone all the time, and like I don't think any like male farmers need to be any type of way towards females because it's just like not a stereotype, but like farmers in Oklahoma are mostly male and they're mostly like older gentlemen. Like that is just the fact of it. There's one woman who's a farmer and lady, and like everyone knows it. Like it's just I don't think they mean anything by it. That's just how it's always been.
Right.
Like, and I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's hard. So I actually, this semester, I'm in a qualitative research class. So qualitative, instead of being all numbers, it's all about people's stories and their perceptions of things. So I've actually have interviewed 7 different people who hire undergraduates in agriculture. So I was kind of going in wanting to look at, okay, when you say you want students to have critical thinking, what do you mean by that? Like, what does critical thinking look like on the job, not just like the textbook definition of it? Every interview unintentionally went towards diversity, and it went towards gender, and it talked about the struggles that a lot of ag companies are having right now, in that they're hiring mostly women because a lot of women are pursuing those jobs, but it is working with the current ag producers or farmers that it's just like y'all doing that trial B on that assessment of, hold on, this isn't what I'm used to. I'm always used to a male salesman coming to my farm. And it's not just the men, it might be their wives. What do you mean you're sending a woman out to our farm to talk to us about fertilizer sales? I don't want my husband with a woman. And so companies are having a hard time saying, like, we want to hire the best of the best. We don't know who, but we're having the struggle with our customers and people going out. And so then we're sending male and females out together. Do you think maybe is that a good answer or not? No, because you're kind of...
female's married or that male's married, and then they're spending all this time alone with somebody that's not their spouse in a term. Like, so, like...
Yeah. I was going to say, even aside from that, like, you're making it appear like one person's not capable to do this on their own. Like, you would never send a male out and then say, well, they need to have a female go with them, right? So this topic is very relevant in ag right now, and I don't even think I realized it, to be completely honest, until I got done with these interviews. And I will tell you, not a single one of my interview questions asked anything about. I could show y'all my it's crazy that ag wants to be talking about this, but nobody knows how. So I'm just saying that it's very relevant, it's going on, and it's just crazy to see this happening. I liked one thing that Heather said in the video, and it stuck with me since we did this panel discussion last year, was the idea that she always wanted to know what her dad was doing in the cattle business, but when people would come over to her house, her dad would tell her to get out of the room, that it wasn't for little girls, so she would hide behind the couch. Did y'all catch that story? Mm-hmm. What did y'all think about that? Any similar experiences or stories for that?
I always was attached to my dad's hip when I was little. Wherever he went, I wanted to go and be a part of it. But it was always reverse, because my dad was always fine with me. He loved that I always wanted to be doing what he was doing with them. Mm-hmm. But we would go places and they'd be like, well, should she be back here when you would go to bed or something mm-hmm. Oh, she's kind of young, I don't know that she should be seeing it. But a guy would come in with his son and they wouldn't be they wouldn't be concerned about it. So I think it was reverse, and my dad would be like, well, if she doesn't want to see it, she'll walk out of here. Or he was just more of almost encouraging them to
mm-hmm.
be okay with it, because he has two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't think twice about taking you places.
Yeah.
And then but it is funny, the men around our county, because our county is big, but we're the biggest county in Ohio, but it's still a small town feel. But I'll go
mm-hmm.
somewhere now and you're oh, you're friends. I remember you when you were this big. So they remember me more that my dad let me stay around, and they respect
mm-hmm.
me now more. If I want to go back and get a job in the county, I would have an easier time doing that than going somewhere else, just because my dad did bring me around and
yeah.
did have introduced me to people, and I had to introduce myself and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Was there anything in the video that you, after you watched it, maybe you read the chapter before you watched it, or you read the chapter after, but it contradicted some of the things in the chapter that you're hold on, that's not what the book said?
So the thing we just did, it made me think of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked whether that was the trait of a supporter or a leader, or if it was the trait of a male or a female. I don't remember which two it was, but one of them was talking about women, whenever she had women as her, I guess, leader, if you will, her boss,
mm-hmm.
And then she was talking about how because they were a woman, they acted a certain way, and then this other lady was no, that's a leadership style, not because she's a woman or a man. You know do you remember what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think that's really important, because the way that I would lead, or the way that I have led, I don't think is because I'm a male or a female. I just think it's the style of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I think that's, people don't think about that so much. They're oh, female, compassionate. I'm not necessarily.
Yeah.
You know.
So I think that's one thing that this theory class really helps you with, is you start to realize leadership isn't about necessarily personality or trait, right? That was the beginning of class, and we decided that okay, that's not effective in completely describing the leadership process. There's a lot more complexity to it. And we do have these implicit biases about what traits we think go with certain genders, right? And if that's the only way we're trying to determine whether someone's a leader or not, y'all should now be able to say, hold on, no, let's stop, let's rethink this. So I think that's a really good point. I have tried not to give personal examples, but I'm a female, so it's hard not to have, again, it's hard not to have some biases. We all have them, and I've had now a career where I've had examples of things that I think at the time I didn't realize work. I was a little naive, that now I'm oh man, that was bad. But where's I going with this? Oh, so a good example. I can't tell y'all how many meetings I've been in where there's only been one female at the table, and they feel very strongly about their opinion, and they're trying to voice their opinion. What do they get called every time? The B word. Angry. Combative. Have y'all I've been in a meeting with those same group of people where I've seen somebody else act the same way, and what are they called? Passionate, strong-willed, assertive, working in teams. How many of y'all, let's be honest, have worked in teams where you've had women and men working together, and if the woman kind of takes the lead of the group and is trying to keep everybody on task, what do you call them?
Bossy.
Bossy! But if it were a guy, have you had a guy in your group take the lead? What do we tend to call them? The
The
leader.
biggest bias I've had, it was a class last fall, and it was structures. So we were building a shed, and we had groups, and it was me and 2 other guys. And we were cutting something out, and we had a certain mathematical way to do it. And they were talking about how they were going to do it, and I suggested, I said, hey, why don't we do it this way? That's going to take out 2 of your steps. And they both looked at me blank-faced. And then they said, no, we're going to do it our way. And I was just like, okay. Because I didn't know what I was talking about because it was girls.
So I want to give guys the opportunity. Guys, y'all aren't talking, so I want to include y'all. Okay? Again, this is not a. I don't want y'all to feel. Why do y'all think that happens? Do you think women are perceiving that wrong? Do you think maybe?
I kind of do sometimes.
Okay.
I can't speak for every situation, but I mean sometimes it might have just been because they didn't think she was right, whether gender aside, you know what I'm saying?
So what in like that situation do you think could be done to avoid any misconceptions being made from that situation on both parties? Like what could Keely have done different? What could her teammates have done different in that situation for her not to walk away feeling like it was because she was a female that they didn't listen to her?
They could have given a reason as to why they felt she was wrong or why they felt they needed to go down that path. Just give her a reason. Don't just be like, well,
I could have even taken the time to think about it.
At least like
Acknowledged,
thought about. So some discussion there. What do you think Keely could have done? Huh?
I'm going to say she was really trying to prove them wrong, I guess, in that situation. If they were so adamant about the way that they were doing it, that means they were probably going to do it and you weren't going to have any part of it anyways. I just would have done your way. And then, like, whenever I was done 10 minutes earlier, I said, sorry, I guess you can't use these pieces.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so I mean, Keely could have done it her own way. How in that moment could you have asked why?
Well, I knew why they were doing it that way, but because they had been talking about it amongst themselves. But it didn't make sense because it was like 2 or 3 steps longer than it actually had to be. And when I suggested taking this out, it just was like a foreign concept. Like, but,
I mean,
But you didn't really push, or
no, I didn't want to have that argument.
even being a guy, I've had that same thing happen to.
Have you?
You know what I'm saying?
Would you say you've had it happen where you've worked in groups of all girls, and you're?
I can't say I've ever been in that situation,
Uh-huh.
but I've had it happen working with other guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could totally take this conversation and flip it on its head and say, hey guys, when's the time that you've worked with all females and you feel like nobody's listened to you? And why did you feel like women weren't listening to you? Maybe they didn't think you cared. Like, again, what are some of those gender stereotypes we might have about guys, right?
it's like when my dad tries to walk into the kitchen at Thanksgiving. He's like, oh, why don't you do this? And I'm like, no. You go back and say,
You don't know anything about cooking. Yeah. Yeah. What do we do when guys cry?
Yeah.
What do we do when guys cry? How many, okay, let's be real. Guys, how many of y'all are comfortable crying in front of other people? Thank you, Marco. Look, oh my gosh, y'all, I just totally showed implicit bias. Did y'all just catch that? Because I was just like, oh, thank you for showing emotion, which was implying that men shouldn't show emotion. I just did it to y'all in class, okay? Do y'all see how, this stuff just kind of freaks me out because we just don't know we do it till it happens. The key is do we recognize it and do we change what we're doing as a result of it? But yeah, there's these biases there. I think that the video, it's funny, Penny and I had actually talked about, do we want to do another panel this year? But I just felt the one that we had last year was so powerful and still Not that I don't think if we did it again, it wouldn't have the same effect, but I just liked it. Man, they hit on everything. I hope y'all did make those direct connections in your discussion. And I would say, if you didn't go through and read other people's posts, I would go back and read it. One thing I want to point out, and I'm going to totally give kudos to this person, is to Calvin. You talked about your sister. Tell us about your sister. What is she doing?
She's going to school and being a doctor.
Mm-hmm. And is the medical field, do they have some of these same issues, you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That's what she tells me about.
Yeah. So he kind of made a point at his that he said, kind of after watching the video and after reading, he's like, I realize like this is something we need to talk about because he has a sister that he wants her to have the same opportunities. How many of y'all have siblings of a different gender? Right? How many of y'all maybe potentially want to have kids one day? How many of y'all think that those kids could potentially be female? No, right? So is this relevant to all of us? Yes. And it kind of goes back to that quote. And that quote that I gave y'all came from Warren Buffett. He's the one who said, if we're not really looking at developing leaders, and he said women leaders, but you could fill in that blank with anything, any group of people. If we tend to marginalize a group of people, we're losing part of the brain power that our society could potentially have. So it's important for us to have these conversations. I do want to point out some of the big things in this chapter and have some conversation about them. The PowerPoint slides are up, so I don't want to spend time like defining things really. We did the association test. I want to do a quick kind of like fact or myth thing for us here. So the chapter points out this idea that as we're looking at gender and leadership, again, what you need to realize is that the research that's being done in this is not about saying men are doing everything wrong. That is not what it's about. It's saying, okay, now that we recognize just as many women are going into the workforce as men, what is this dynamic looking like? Okay, there are some assumptions that men and women lead different, and that comes from our implicit bias about gender. So there's research looking at, is there a difference? Are men more effective than women? So would y'all say there are definitely some careers or professions that we would say women, like there's a reason women aren't in those jobs? And why? And can you, yeah.
Okay, so farming, I mean, we're in agriculture, so this is just I don't know, the obvious answer, but working on a farm this summer, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, but it is I see why there are so many men in the field as opposed to women, not because we can't do it, but it's just
Physiology. Can you say that?
Yeah,
built, just the way that we're built.
The way that we're built, have you ever tried to put hay net into a baler by yourself? I'm not even tall enough to do it, let alone I have to pull the pickup up behind it so you can put it in,
Yeah.
Just
so you just have to do things differently.
My dad can do it so easy, and it takes me a little bit to even get it up there because it's so heavy. Just random things that you don't think of, and so you're doing it, and you're like, oh crap, I don't know how I'm going to get that up there. Just random stuff.
Yeah, and I mean there are things our physiology. Women are different. We are just, unless we become super macho bodybuilder people, which is gross. My bias. We're probably never going to be as strong as you guys, right? There's nothing. My husband can not work out for months and decide he wants to go run, and he runs 3 miles without thinking about it. Big girl can't run more than 2 minutes before I'm physiologically we're different, right? Bodies are built different. Y'all think that's a joke. It's so true. Makes me so mad. He's so scared. Anyways, so metabolisms are different. But anywho, there are some differences, but it's this idea of, okay, if it doesn't mean that a woman shouldn't want to do those jobs or shouldn't want to go into those fields. It just means there needs to be changes. Same thing, again, you could take the gender out and you could put another group of people. People with disabilities, right? I heard a story yesterday about a blind student going to school at Fresno State, and they lived as close as possible on campus, like in housing, but they still had to cross the street. And there was no like chirp thing, you know what I'm talking about? So this person, a hazard, right? And like they didn't have a seeing eye dog. The person came from Mexico on a scholarship, and their seeing eye dog had died right before they moved. Like couldn't afford another one, what have you. So a professor went to the university and said, "Could y'all install a chirper on the street so that the student can cross the street safely?" And they said, "No, that's $1,000, and this is the first time anyone's asked. So no." How many of y'all would say that's okay? Screw how much it is. Like you're allowing. So this poor person, their whole time in school was late to class all the time, was having literally to get rides from people. Just all these kind of things that you're like, okay, we would say that's not okay. It's just this idea of, okay, as more people are coming into the industry or doing things, are we providing opportunities to accommodate for them to have those same opportunities? Maybe things have to be done differently. That's just kind of what it's about.
And speaking of that, one of the things that really hit me in the video was when, I think it was Ms. Arthur said it, that she had witnessed a lot of times women were less supportive of other women trying to get into the industry because whether they wanted to stay in power or they didn't want to lose their position or whatever it may be. And I thought that was really insightful, interesting.
That tends to happen a lot in marginalized groups, that when someone finally does get to a leadership position, it then almost becomes harder. And I don't know if it's this thing of like, well, I fought to get here, so everybody else needs to fight to get here. But what we do know as a whole from a ton of research is that you're more willing to do something if you see someone like you doing it. Would y'all agree with that? What is something that you don't see people like yourself doing, so you've never really thought about doing?
Skateboarding.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was thinking in my head. Who said it? Okay, why? Like, what about people who skateboard doesn't remind you of yourself that you say, okay, that's not something I've ever thought about doing?
Well, I'm not the least bit athletic, so there you go.
Yeah. So differences in athleticism, right? Puts us in different groups. What else?
In my case, like coordination.
Coordination.
I think they say like skateboard on campus, like me as I want to skateboard. It's just how they dress to me, like their style. I wouldn't look good on a skateboard. The guy in Star Jeans is not me being on a skateboard.
Yeah. I don't know, Ginger's pretty, she rides a skateboard. She's pretty diverse. I did that.
Yeah.
That's like the big thing, like they're in skinny jeans and Vans. And
just differences, right? And so again, it's kind of one of those that this becomes hard because sometimes there's situations where we don't see people. And so that's one reason why we want to open up these leadership opportunities to more diverse people, to more diverse genders, more diverse ethnicities, whatever, again, the group is that you want it to be. Because then the more people that are in those roles, it's not a getting rid of everybody else because they're doing things wrong, but it helps people see that they have the opportunity to reach those same opportunities as well. So let's play this little game real quick. Based off of your reading, we know, so the reading kind of talks about this. In higher education, there's this crazy thing going on right now where there are more women, like getting degrees, right? We have more women who are graduating with bachelor's degrees. We have more women graduate with master's degrees. So because of that, women now also represent a majority of leadership in the workforce. Is this fact or myth?
Fact.
How many say fact? How many say it's a myth? It's a myth. So this is one area that leadership research is really looking at. How many of y'all remember reading about the pipeline problem? Anybody want to describe it to me? What's the pipeline problem that's happening?
They describe it as there's a hole in the pipeline because at the start, women earning all these degrees higher than men, and by the time you actually get to the position, there's less women.
Yeah. So to give you all an example, and this is just like, again, like one little piece of it in ag. How many of y'all are ag education majors? Raise them high. Ag ed. 2, 3. Anybody else? So out of our 3 ag ed people, 2 females, 1 male. So what's that? 66%-ish? That's about right as far as our undergraduate population becoming certified to teach ag. Way over majority of those people are women. Master's degrees in ag education, what do y'all think that percentage is? About the same. Doctorate degrees, PhDs. It becomes about 60-40, 70-30. So now let's look at faculty members. I probably shouldn't do this on camera because it's in our department. How many of our faculty members are male or female in ag education?
Specifically ag, I've had 1 female and she was a TA.
A TA. Faculty members were male. Okay, that's just ag education major. That's kind of an example of this pipeline. Like for a while there, women are either equal or right above as far as degrees, but then why when we kind of get to the end, why does it teeter out? Like what's going on? And so research is trying to understand that. And the book gives some reasons for that, and we'll get to that. There's this idea of a glass ceiling turned labyrinth, and I kind of put these 2 pictures up here to show you that. Let me turn the lights off so you can kind of see that a little bit better. And it's showing the difference between the 2. So the one on the left is the glass ceiling, one on the right is a labyrinth. When we talk about a glass ceiling in leadership, what are we talking about?
The level that you can reach.
The level that you can reach. And so it's kind of hard to see, but there's like this dome, a glass dome around this woman on the ladder. And then the guy's like, he got the star, he reached for the star. So I think for a while there, as more women were getting into the workforce, there was this idea that there was a glass ceiling, right? That like you could see through it, you could see the way to the top, you could see the path you needed to go on to get the CEO position, but women were like, they're just stopping halfway. And there was this idea that there's just this invisible barrier because of gender biases, because of whatever, that women were just never going to be able to reach it. But research is actually kind of saying, you know what, no, because are there women who are in prominent leadership roles? Right? Like some would say they shattered the glass ceiling, but we would kind of say like, no, it's possible. They can do it. So really it's more of a labyrinth. And so what's that metaphor talking about? When we look at kind of gender issues in leadership, why do we look at it as a labyrinth instead of a glass ceiling? Get there, it might be harder. There's more complexity to it than just people don't want women in leadership, so they don't hire them for jobs. Like there's more complexity and things that have to be navigated. And so it's this idea of trying to really understand, again, what's causing that labyrinth. 3 things were really pointed out in the chapter as contributors to this idea of it not being a glass ceiling, but it being a labyrinth. And I guess this is one thing that, again, there's kind of that idea that women just aren't in leadership positions and we need to be pushing it. But like, no, like data shows that there are. Women, again, are earning a lot of the degrees. They're half of the labor force now. I looked up, and I don't remember if I put it on a specific slide or not, but I looked up like what the current U.S. population is. There's like something online that literally like you can watch it update second by second, which is kind of morbid if you think about it. It was weird. I was like, oh, someone just died. Oh, someone was just born. Like I don't know if it's legit or not, but it entertained me for 5 minutes. But ADD at its finest. I get on tangents. But, as far as U.S. population goes, about 51% of the U.S. population is women. And so that statistic right there is saying, okay, about 90% of women are in the workforce. What we have to understand, and I say we because, again, I'm in the same age group as y'all, believe it or not. We've kind of been used to that, right? Whether you had a mom who worked at home or not, worked from home or not, we've been used to seeing women working. So this idea that wasn't always the case it's hard for us to understand, right? Because we've never really experienced it. But less than 40 years ago, that number was only at 15%. So that's a huge jump in a short amount of time. It doesn't seem like it, but it is. Going from only 15% of the workforce, 15% of women working, to close to 90% is really big. And so, again, we just haven't really thought about, should we be changed? Should things change? Should things be adapted or not? That's kind of where this, I would say, kind of struggle this conversation is coming out of. One thing we do have to look, though, is that even though there are so many women in these positions, there's still a low number. So when we look at Fortune 500 companies, 5%, 5.4%. When we look at boards, so boards for organizations, only a fifth, 20% of them are women. I can tell you, I've told a lot of y'all before, I was always really involved in Farm Bureau and different organizations like that. I can't tell y'all how many times I've been the only woman in the room. I've never, I don't want to say never. One, in my home county, our county Farm Bureau board, I've only ever known there to be one woman who sat on our board. And interesting, just kind of something to think about, Farm Bureau has women committees. What do most of the women committees do? Put on dinners. Are they involved in the political activity as much? No. Just something to kind of think about. Why?
Do women run for your board and don't get it, or do they just not run?
They don't even get nominated. So a lot of times, a lot of those board positions are nominations. And specifically with Farm Bureau, when you pay your dues, if you're married, you can pay you and your spouse become a member or what have you. Just never get nominated. Why?
More times people limit themselves, for example, being an elementary teacher, that's mainly females you see, but not necessarily. I know one guy that's an elementary teacher.
Yeah. So why? Why aren't men wanting to be elementary school teachers? Why aren't men wanting to major in ag communications?
Just in general, my high school, there was probably 5, maybe the max, male actual teachers.
Yeah.
It ties back to when you said that now there's more women working than there used to be. When my mom doesn't work, we farm, and so when she had my sister and she had me, she after we got in school, she was always well, maybe I should go get a job. And my dad was well, no, because if they're sick, and we dance competitively, so we had to have somebody take us to practice. And he's if we need cards or something, it was just more helpful, if she stayed home. And she actually took a lot of bad talk to that, because people were well, it must be nice to be able to make enough money and not have to work and all this. So it was almost it was frowned upon that then she wasn't in the workforce, even though she's technically employed by the farm. So it's kind of shifted, I feel like.
There's definitely, again, that goes back to biases, right? And that's where when you make a judgment about something, you've got to then take that next second to say, why did I just think that about this situation? Am I accurately perceiving that? That's a family choice. Is there anything wrong with family choices? No, not at all. I'll be honest, when I had Wilkinson, there were times for a good while I was home on maternity leave that Chad and I discussed whether I should stay home or not. We honestly, if I had had a better job, if I was making the same amount of money he was making, we honestly had this conversation. He thought about, why does it have to be you? He hates traveling for his job. He honestly thought but the situation wasn't, we just weren't in a financial situation where he makes double the amount of money I'll ever make, ever. I mean, he works in private industry. So, but if things had been equal, that was a conversation. Do you think everybody has those conversations, though? Are there sometimes just the assumption that that's kind of where? So it's not, we've got to be careful about saying, oh, well, they just don't want to work. No, that's a family decision, and they have the right to make that decision. But then, too, as a family, how are you making those decisions? Is it based off of these preconceived roles, or is it because that's the situation and what needs to be done? So it's just, does that kind of make sense? So, yeah, don't ever feel guilty, any of y'all, for any decision that you make as a family. You do what's best for your family and screw what other people think. Politics. I put this up here because it was in the chapter. Whether we don't have to get into the whole Democrat versus Republican, but as a whole, we would say politicians are seen as leaders, right? And they're supposed to be representative of us. One of the problems, honestly, and we've got to be really honest about it in the United States, is we're a democracy-ish. And democracies are supposed to be representative of their populations, right? Up to this point, has our government necessarily been representative of our population? If 51% of our population's women are the people, and again, these are just critical questions. Don't know that there's a right answer to them. But if we don't ask the questions, then we don't think about it, right? So the chapter talks about the fact that, again, women make up only almost 51%. The last election season, when we looked at Congress seats, only 19% of those seats were filled by women. I hope y'all looked at and watched kind of that news segment that I posted in Bright Space for y'all. Y'all weren't required. It was called The Pink Wave. The reason why I posted that is after watching this election cycle, y'all are going to see it in the history books as that. The 2018 election cycle was a huge, it was just huge compared to the difference in women leadership. And so I've included in purple here kind of some of those numbers. So previously 105 seats, this year 118. So, I mean, we went up 3%. Some movements better than none, right? Is there anybody who says we shouldn't care? Anybody? Tell me. Let's chat about it.
I've just never thought of it just doesn't even cross my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever, if I'm having a conversation with a guy and they don't like my idea, I don't think it's because of my gender. I just think it's because it might not be a good idea. It doesn't cross my mind that I don't even think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair. There's some situations I don't even think about it. There's sometimes that it takes a while to think about it. What about you? You say you don't.
I mean, I grew up in smack dab of Politician Central. They're all the same regardless of their gender.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should just vote for the person, or the person should be in there if they reflect their voters' views and what they want to do. It doesn't matter if you're male or female.
Yeah.
I feel like it just, I don't think about it. If I'm a Republican, if I have a difference between a male and a female candidate, I don't look at the gender. I'm well, who do I want to represent me more? Who has shown that they've done this or this more? It's not.
My granddad was in the Senate for 19.5 years, passed away before he did 20 years in 2006, and so my grandma ran to finish out his term and then also replace his position, and she probably got more, not quite criticism, but people questioning why are you doing this? You're a woman. You're not even supposed to be in this in general. And so she got more criticism from that than she did actually people oh, you shouldn't, you're a woman, you're not going to win. It was more of a why. This is not your area.
That was kind of like in the video when can't remember which one it was. It said they worked for Secretary Reese, and she said she had multiple people come up you're not going to make it. This is a man's world. You didn't think about that. And she's then we elected a female governor.
Mm-hmm.
I think so much maybe not the seats, because I don't think that's the thing. I think we have to, like they were talking about, change the perception. Is politics a man's world, or is it just who can best represent the people?
Yeah.
And if it is a man, then so be it. But the views of the people, not necessarily the percentages.
Yeah.
I think it's almost going the other way. It's become such a trend and a focus that women have to be in politics that it doesn't matter what they do, that's who other people are. And I think that's going to be more predominant in the future.
Yeah.
I think feminism is much more of a movement right now than it has ever been in my life. You know what I mean? Like, men almost are like making it fun, like, okay, even if we don't want these women around, we're going to have to make it happen. It's going to be worse for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I remember reading some people's comments telling like there's kind of this double-edged sword that's going on, and I think that's where, we have to have these conversations of like, okay, what's really the issue? Does anybody in here want to be chosen or elected for something just because you're a boy or a girl, male or female? I don't think anybody of us would say that. Do you want to get chosen for something because you were white or you were black? What do we call that when we do that to people? Affirmative action, but also what else? What do we call it, Markel? Huh? Tokenizing. And I just tokenized you because I asked you to answer that. Have y'all heard that term before? Right? Like you get the one, you've got to show diversity, which diversity is just counting heads. So you choose one person and what have you. Like nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be chosen. I don't want to find out that I got asked to be on something just because I needed one female on it. No, choose me because I meet the qualifications. I do whatever. But let's kind of think about the other side of this. Again, if people don't go into leadership roles in situations that they don't see themselves in, we're less likely to see people in that, right? So I think, and this is maybe is like ethical kind of going back, should we want more women in politics if we want it to be more representative of our population? So it's not a bad thing, right? Again, not saying that. I read in some people's posts too, and I would agree with this based on my faith system. Do you think that men and women are created differently? That there are some strengths that we bring to the table? And again, a lot of that's based off of your worldview of things, but so differences aren't bad, right? What do differences provide? Diversity. What does diversity provide? More options, well-rounded. We know it improves teamwork. So regardless of this whole thing of like, is there a benefit to having a more diverse political system? Because we're getting more ideas. We're getting, right? So like that's kind of the process we've got to go through thinking is rather than kind of like getting defensive or saying like, nope, we shouldn't worry about it. Like, yes, let's hire the best people, but this should kind of be back in our mind, this idea, because we want to have the best people at the table. We also know that having more ideas and opinions at the table brings greater results. So that's kind of what this is getting at as well. So I would definitely say don't just vote for a female candidate just because they're female and you think there needs to be more females. You vote because they align with your views, but don't discount. Right? Don't discount them just because they're female. Do you think there might be some implicit biases? Kind of going back to what Caleb said, what happened with his grandma. There were just people who said, well, what do you do? Like,
well, a lot of people don't like, they say that they don't like to elect a female just because like the emotions that come along with it, but is it really that, or is it actually that?
Yeah. So, I mean, to get off of the political boat, what happened with Serena Williams this past year? Anybody?
She's a cheat.
But like, what else about her cheating though that came out of that?
Was she taking steroids?
The way she reacted.
The way she reacted. So what did they say about her reaction and what happened?
She accused officials of like judging her character.
Yeah.
Like that was her big deal, like, I'm not this and that. So then it went back on like how she defended herself.
Yeah, so there were all these sports commentators that after this whole incident, if y'all don't know about this, I would just Google it. There's like all kinds of crazy stuff on it, videos, what have you. But essentially all the sports reporters talked about how awful she handled this situation, that she got irrational, that she got angry. And then, do y'all think that there was backlash from that? Yes, because a couple months prior to that, there was a male tennis player who reacted the same way, and none of that is written about them. So it's a very blatant example of just kind of those gender biases, and why did we call her emotional and irrational, but this guy, we just said that he really cared about winning and was competitive.
I think a lot of that had to do with the guy that threw the fifth hasn't won a whole lot of anything. And Serena Williams is one of the most accomplished athletes in general ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes off just, coming back after having her kid. Then that happens. And you've got one of the most, well-known athletes in the world that's never had a problem, never done anything like that, and then all of a sudden that happened. And it kind of caught everybody by surprise, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
and she took so much backlash at the beginning anyway, coming back and oh, she's not going to be as good because she had a baby and all that. She took a lot of backlash before any of that even happened. So I think when this happened and the commentators started barking at her again, she just flipped. And so they didn't want to make it their fault, but they made her mad. So they're going to say, oh well,
She was cheating.
Huh?
How was she cheating?
I don't know that she was cheating, but I think
It was a bad call.
They called they kind of gave her a penalty, but she didn't think it was fair, so she challenged it, and then because she challenged it, she got very assertive about it. But
She's not really mad.
Wasn't there something too about her, this may be not tennis or not this match, but wasn't the coach supposedly being signaling?
That's what she got accused of, was coaching from the sideline.
And that's not.
She said, I've never taken coaching, blah, blah, this and that. That's when she got real offensive. But if she would honestly have changed, instead of saying I'm a mother, this and that, if she would have just simply said I'm an honest athlete, I don't think this would be blown up and made her so she took the mother role and took opinions that she's this, but that already threw her into a gender bias kind of role, and it's against a male referee.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really kind of where she kind of maybe went wrong, or would have say different outcomes.
And nobody ever said anything about how the referee was being a complete.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? But it's
and
crazy.
And race into it on her half.
Yeah.
We looked at if you look at some of the graphics, one of them portrayed her almost.
Oh gosh, I have one of my best friends is a black woman, and her and I've had a lot of discussions that it's bad to be part of one marginalized group, but imagine being part of two. That intersectionality, and there are we just have these biases. We have biases not just about how women and men should act, but do you think we have biases about how a black woman should act versus a white woman? I would encourage y'all, I almost shared it, but y'all probably already think I'm crazy and whatever, but on Facebook, Jada Pinkett Smith, y'all know who she is? Will Smith's wife. She does this weekly Facebook video thing. It's really cool. It's called The Red Table, and it's a table she has in her house that she just brings people in and they talk about different subjects, and I watch it because I watch crazy things. But she actually does a whole segment on why white women and black women don't support each other. It's fascinating. And in the last 5 minutes, how many of y'all have already taken 2403, the multicultural class, or you're in it now? Watched Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, Class Divided. Okay, Jane Elliott, that researcher, she comes in the last 6 minutes and just guns a-blazing. It is amazing. So y'all should find that on Facebook. It's really good. I loved watching it and have had some really cool conversations with friends. And poor Markel stopped by my office was it Wednesday that I made you late? Tuesday. Yeah. Sorry again. Anyways, yeah, it's really good. We're getting towards the end of class, and I knew this was going to happen. We didn't even get to half of the conversation today. But do y'all feel, I guess kind of just to stop there,